John, Kiera, Pope, and JJ are a group of friends living on the island of Outer Banks. Their group calls themselves the Pogues. That day, they were messing around when they got spotted by the police. But with the strength of their youth, they successfully escaped. On this island, society is separated by two clear dividing lines. The rich, nicknamed the Kooks, live in lavish mansions. On the other side are those who live on the cut, always having to scrounge for a living every day. JJ is John's best friend. He is a true local here and is known as the most reckless member of the group. Kiera is the only girl in the Pogue group. She comes from a rich family, so she can mingle with both worlds on the island. Her family owns a key restaurant in the Outer Banks. Pope is known as the brains of the group, and his dad is said to know everything on this island. Finally, there's John, the leader of the group. He lives in an old fishing shack on the marsh. Currently, his father has been missing for 9 months during a search for a shipwreck, and John's mother left home when he was very young, so he has no idea where she is. That day, a hurricane named Agatha was making landfall on the island. Despite that, with his usual craziness, JJ still invited Pope to go surfing. It must be said he truly lived up to his reputation as the most reckless one in the group. Soon, the hurricane had swept across the entire island, leaving behind a scene of devastation. But instead of cleaning up, JJ and John went to entice Pope. So the young man rushed off with his friends, despite his father asking him to stay. After picking up Kiera, the Pogue group was complete. While showing off by drinking beer on the bow of the boat, JJ was knocked into the water by a collision. Luckily, after the crash, no one was injured. It seemed that after the storm, something had drifted into the river. After a closer look, the group realized there was a sunken boat below. Without hesitation, they all dived down to check the situation. Fortunately, there were no bodies down there. Because it was quite deep, John would bring an anchor to dive down. After a while of searching, he found a key to a motel. When the group left, not far away, a dead body was floating on the water's surface. In the luxurious apartments on the island, the girl known as the Kook Princess, named Sarah, was causing trouble. It was known that she had prepared for the storm with the missing husband of a woman named Lana, but since last night, Sarah hadn't seen him either. Meanwhile, the Poe group found the motel using the key. The place was just as devastated after the storm. Since no one was in the room, JJ and John decided to open the door themselves. After rummaging around, the two found a safe and a piece of paper with numbers written on it. As a result, John managed to open it. Inside was a large amount of cash, a gun, and an envelope. But at that moment, Pope and Kiera, who were outside, saw the police arriving. They had to immediately find a way to warn the two guys inside. Luckily, the two of them managed to catch Kiera's signal. When the police entered the room, the two teens had disappeared. It turned out they were hiding outside the window, which made Pope and Kiera very worried. At this point, the two of them saw two policemen dividing the money from the safe and seizing the envelope. But due to carelessness, JJ dropped the gun, making a noise. Luckily, when the policeman opened the window curtain, he saw nothing unusual. Just like that, the two teens were able to return to the boat safely. Unexpectedly, with his slyness, JJ had managed to grab the gun and some cash. At this time, the body of the man in the marsh had been found by the police. It was none other than Lana's husband, named Scooter. It was known that the sunken yacht belonged to him, but the police had not yet been able to find it. However, this was extremely strange because a man who was said to be dirt poor suddenly had a yacht. The Poe group immediately noticed this anomaly. They even thought Scooter must have been smuggling illegal goods to get rich so quickly. So John suggested diving down to the wreck again to investigate. But before that, they would throw a party to lighten the mood. The party quickly attracted many young people on the island, from the poor to the rich neighborhoods, and even tourists were welcome to join. Among them was the Kook Princess, Sarah. Also present was her boyfriend, Topper. He was from the wealthy Kook crowd and an annoying rival of the Poe group. Their beach party lasted late into the night. At this point, JJ wanted to offer Sarah a beer, but was stopped by Topper. So John also jumped into the confrontation for being insulted by him, saying the Pogues were filthy people. The two immediately got into a fight on the beach, with the surrounding teens constantly cheering them on. As a result, John was wrestled down and was about to be drowned. Seeing this, JJ took his gun and pointed it straight at Topper's head. After subduing him, he even fired a shot to chase the teens away. As soon as morning came, Sheriff Peterkin came to John's house to ask about what happened last night. He confirmed there was a fight, but no one used a gun. Besides the fight, Peterkin also asked John if he had seen the shipwreck in the marsh. However, he denied everything. Through this, the sheriff also warned him not to hang around that marsh anymore. But this made John even more curious about the yacht. At the same time, JJ also felt that there must be something valuable underneath. Since he worked for Sarah's father, Ward Cameron, John snuck into Ward's warehouse to borrow a diving suit. Before leaving, his actions were discovered by Sarah. However, she didn't seem to care that John was stealing her dad's diving suit. At this moment, the police were also planning to search for the sunken yacht. After briefing, two strange men also volunteered to join the search team with the police. At the same time, John dived down to the spot of the sunken yacht. But just as he got down, a police boat arrived. Below, John found a bag inside the boat. Luckily, the police didn't see anything unusual before he surfaced. But as soon as he got on the boat, the two men who had joined the search earlier showed up. Noticing something was wrong, they sped up to chase the Pogue group. Unable to keep up, they used guns to pursue them. Seeing this, Kiera cleverly threw a net out behind them. As a result, it got tangled in the propeller of the pursuer's boat. And so, the Pogue group was able to return safely. When he opened the bag, John saw something familiar. It was the compass his father used to carry. It was also an heirloom passed down through many generations of John's family. Furthermore, his father's disappearance was completely absurd as he was a true fisherman. For the compass to return to him, there must have been a reason. At this point, John returned the diving suit to Ward's yacht. As soon as he stepped on board, he saw Sarah sitting there. She also promised not to tell her father about John borrowing the diving suit without permission. However, their conversation was overheard by Sarah's younger sister, Wheezy. When John returned, he and JJ went to Mrs. Lana's house. As soon as they arrived, they heard a noise inside. It turned out she had just been threatened by the two men who had chased the Pogue's boat earlier. When they left, the two of them entered to see the house in a mess, with Lana sitting in a corner. John was very curious about the guys who had just left. When she saw the compass, she also told John to keep it a secret, to absolutely not tell anyone that he had it because of the danger the compass would bring. After that, Lana kicked the two teens out of her house. Meanwhile, Wheezy was having a conversation with Topper. The little girl said that her sister Sarah had been flirting with John that morning and had kept the fact that John borrowed the diving gear without permission a secret. Hearing this, he decided to tell Ward everything. Over here, the Pogue group was discussing the attack by the two men on Mrs. Lana, as well as the importance of the compass. So John decided to look for clues in his father's office, which had been locked ever since he disappeared. Very quickly, they saw a picture of the first person to own the compass. One by one, its owners had all died strangely. After re-examining the compass, they found the word Redfield inscribed on it. It must hold some clue. While they were discussing, the two men suddenly showed up. They started tearing everything apart. Since they hadn't found John's father's office yet, the Pogue group had slipped away by the time they broke in. Based on the clues they had, the men found the blueprints for a ship named the Royal Merchant. Soon, they had collected all the documents. After they left, the Pogue group also decided to go to the lighthouse named Redfield. This time, JJ and Pope would stand guard outside. When John and Kiera went to the top of the lighthouse, they met a man. At first, he didn't want to talk to them until John mentioned the Royal Merchant ship. He said the ship had disappeared in the graveyard of the Atlantic in 1892. According to his speculation, it was currently north of the eye of the storm and only 16 kilometers away in the direction he pointed. According to calculations, the ship could be at a depth of 300 meters. But when he learned that John had the compass, the old man's expression immediately changed, and he even called the police to report it. With no other choice, John and Kiera quickly fled. When they saw the police car arriving, JJ and Pope ran off first, while the other two members were spotted by the police. Therefore, John quickly handed the compass to Kiera. At the police station, Peterkin realized John had the compass. She considered it evidence in an investigation. But no matter what he said, John insisted he didn't have it. Luckily, Kiera's father bailed them both out. Before going home, Kiera gave the compass back to John. As soon as he returned, he was called by Ward. First, he asked what he had taken from the boat without permission. Of course, John didn't hide the fact that he had borrowed his diving suit. However, Ward still insisted on firing him. So John immediately assumed it was Sarah who had told on him. She didn't even have time to explain as he stormed off in anger. Before he could get home, he was approached by a car. It was none other than the two men who had been chasing him from the beginning. Luckily, John was quick on his feet and ran away from them. In a residential area like this, they couldn't open fire. But unfortunately for John, he ran right into an electric fence. At that moment, Sheriff Peterkin arrived. At this point, John also decided to give her the compass. Returning home, John decided to forget everything and go back to a normal life, because in recent days he had had enough trouble. But as he was burning everything, he saw a name related to the word Redfield. After that, he invited his friends to a cemetery at night. It turned out that his great-grandmother's grave was named Olivia Redfield. While trying to get inside, a snake crawled out, scaring the whole group. Fortunately, his friend stopped him, otherwise JJ would have bitten the snake. But with the large door of the tomb, they couldn't open it. So Kiera used her small frame to squeeze through a crack. Very quickly, something made her look completely astonished. It was a bag of envelopes left for John by his father. Inside was a map showing the location of the Royal Merchant shipwreck. The other item was a tape recorder that still worked. The recording said that John's father had found the ship, and also warned that if anything happened to him, John should continue what he had started, specifically, to reclaim the gold on the Royal Merchant shipwreck. That night, the Poe group took turns guessing how much gold was on the ship, and also dreamed about what they would do if they had a huge amount of money. So the next plan for the Poe group was definitely to find the Royal Merchant ship. Over here, Sarah's good-for-nothing brother, Rafe, was being lectured by his father. So he got very angry and went to a guy named Barry. Rafe successfully convinced him to sell him drugs. Back with the Poe group, they were planning to steal a drone to explore the shipwreck. Soon, the whole group arrived at the location. Kiera would be the one to try to distract the guard. The three guys would take the opportunity when the door was open to rush inside. However, JJ kept pressing the wrong password for the lock. As a result, the guard's dog detected them, making him alert. While Pope and JJ ran away, John was determined to stay. He used an iron pipe to break the warehouse lock. Very quickly, he found the drone. On the other side, JJ was unfortunately caught by the guard, so he blamed his father for forcing him to come here to find things. Since they were both islanders, the guard let him go. At the same time, on the sea, a fisherman's boat accidentally picked up someone's dead body. That night, in the rich neighborhood, a party for the youth was taking place. To show off, Topper carried Sarah to the roof with the intention of jumping into the pool below. Despite her trying to refuse, he jumped anyway. Meanwhile, her brother Rafe was dividing up drugs to make a profit. At the same time, the police arrived at the fisherman's boat and discovered that the body was none other than the two guys who were looking for the compass. The next morning, the Poe group tested the drone, but more accurately, it was an ROV. It's a type of robot used for underwater missions. While studying the map, Sarah suddenly came to see John. First, she explained that her father knowing about the borrowed diving gear was not her fault. But while John was waiting for Sarah to say more, she quickly left. Meanwhile, Pope was delivering beer to the rich neighborhood. There, he happened to be seen by Rafe and Topper, who were playing golf. Still sore about the incident on the beach, Topper didn't hesitate to cause trouble. After beating Pope up, they quickly left. Back on the boat, JJ immediately noticed his friend had just gotten into trouble. So the two decided to get revenge by targeting Topper's boat. Pope approached it to pull out its drain plug and threw it away. The next day, the Poe group began their search. The ROV was immediately put to its noble task. JJ would be the one to steer the boat to keep it in a fixed position. But at that moment, a heavy rain was approaching. When the ROV reached a depth of 300 meters, they would hold it steady there. And indeed, the group found the Royal Merchant ship below. However, when they let the ROV survey every nook and cranny, there wasn't a single bar of gold there. Because the search device was about to run out of battery, the group could only return in disappointment. Just as he got home, the police came to John's house with the intention of taking him to a foster home. The reason was that his father was missing and there was no one to be his guardian as he was under 18. Obviously, John was very happy with his current free life, so being taken to live with someone else was something he certainly couldn't be happy about. Despite trying to resist, John couldn't fight off the big, fat policeman Thomas, so he had to accept going with them. But on the way, he accidentally dropped a picture of his father. Taking advantage of Thomas stopping the car to search, the young man immediately ran away. On the way, John even borrowed a bike from a guy in town, then performed a jump over a kid's skate park. But before he could celebrate, he got caught in a chain and fell forward. Just then, Sarah passed by and pulled him into her car to avoid the police. John was even able to get his father's picture back. At the same time, Topper had discovered the incident with his boat. The current repair cost could be up to nearly $30,000. Immediately, Topper went to complain to Rafe and Kelsey. After some thought, he realized it must have been Pope's revenge. Sarah had taken John to her house. He was even hidden in her father's office. Because of the wound on John's stomach, Sarah decided to treat it herself. When asked about the painting on the wall, she said it was the founder of Tanny Hill, named Denmark Tanny. Tanny Hill was a cotton plantation, and Sarah's house was also there. Denmark suddenly appeared, paying for the entire land with a lot of gold. Hearing this, John realized he had seen the name Denmark somewhere before. Indeed, he was a survivor of the Royal Merchant shipwreck. But Sarah said that Denmark's documents had been donated by her father to the Student Resource Center at Chapel Hill. So the two decided to go to the archives to learn more about Denmark. Since the ticket sales for the train there were over, the two had to sneak on successfully. Meanwhile, the Poe group was at a movie screening in the Kook neighborhood. Immediately, Topper and his group showed up. Seeing JJ and Pope looking very worried, Kiera didn't understand what was happening to them. On this side, John and Sarah had reached Chapel Hill Island. Before going to the archives, Sarah was even in the mood for some shopping. Soon, the two had a new look. As soon as it got dark, Pope couldn't hold his pee because he drank too much soda earlier. Moreover, Topper's group was sitting at the entrance to the restroom, so he and JJ could only leave in another direction. But just after they had relieved themselves, Topper's group surrounded them. After a few words were exchanged, the two sides started fighting. But being outnumbered, Pope and JJ were getting beaten up. Luckily, at that moment, Kiera came to help by setting the movie screen on fire, causing chaos so they could all escape. At the same time, John and Sarah had arrived at the archives. John also told the truth about his treasure hunt. Thanks to Sarah's family connections, they easily entered the library. Through the documents left by Denmark, they found signs that he had used gold from the shipwreck, as well as a letter on the very day he died, sent to one of his 3 sons. It was written in a language only they could understand. When morning came, Deputy Shoup used surveillance cameras to spot Pope's attack on Topper's boat. His mother demanded that he press charges. Immediately, Shoup was at Pope's house, arresting him. But to protect his friend, JJ stood up and said he was the one who sabotaged Topper's boat. Because above all, he knew that Pope had a better future than him, as Pope was still aspiring to one day get into college. Just like that, JJ was taken to the holding cell at the police station by Shoup. At the same time, John and Sarah had returned to the island. After a day together, the two had truly confirmed their feelings for each other. So Topper had been cheated on, big time. This was probably even more bitter than his boat being destroyed. Sheriff Peterkin had a talk with JJ. She learned that his group was trying to find out about the Royal Merchant shipwreck and that the 2 people pursuing the compass had been attacked and thrown into the sea. Therefore, the murderer's target could be John, so Peterkin hoped JJ could persuade his friend to meet her. Soon after, JJ's abusive father, Luke, came to bail him out. When he heard about the compensation for damaging Topper's boat, he was furious. With the amount being up to $30,000, a normal family like JJ's wouldn't know when they could pay it off. As soon as he got home, he was mercilessly punched by Luke. In his anger, JJ almost shot his old man while he was sleeping, but luckily he managed to stop himself and just ran away from home. At this point, John decided to take Denmark's letter, written in Gullah, to his history teacher to translate. The content was that Denmark had sent a message to his son to go harvest wheat. But that was the day he was executed, so it was obviously very strange. But very quickly, John figured something out. Just as he returned home, he was attacked from behind by JJ, who forced him to be quiet. It turned out the police had been sent to take John to a foster home. The two had to sneak past the pier quietly, then start the boat and leave before Shoup realized. At the police station, Peterkin was thanking a mysterious person for their help. The rich neighborhood was having a party called Midsummer's. Pope and his father were also working there, serving drinks and grilling meat. As dusk fell, John and JJ also showed up. JJ was given a mission to deliver a note to Sarah. Very quickly, the young man disguised himself as a waiter. However, before he could approach Sarah, he was pulled away by Pope and given a hug, which surprised him quite a bit. JJ even responded with a kiss on his cheek. After Pope's thank you, he gave John's letter to Sarah. Immediately, JJ was spotted by Rafe and Kelsey's group, so he immediately fled. But soon, he was caught by them in the bathroom. Luckily, a security guard appeared and rescued him. At this point, Sarah had gone to the meeting spot with John. There, he told her about the location of the gold, which was at the Tanny Hill plantation. But what was needed now was to find the map of this plantation. On JJ's side, he was escorted out because members of the Poe were not welcome there. So the young man immediately started wrecking everything on his way out. This action was immediately supported by Kiera, John, and Pope. At the group meeting, John revealed that the gold from the Royal Merchant was still there. At the same time, Sarah was sneaking into her father's office to find the original map of the Tanny Hill plantation. But while searching, she was discovered by Ward. However, he did not make his daughter's search difficult. As soon as Sarah left, he opened a safe behind Denmark's portrait, and what was hidden inside was a compass identical to John's. At this point, Topper had snuck into his house to find Sarah, but the person in her room was her little sister, Wheezy. So he asked the little girl where Sarah was now. At this time, she had arranged to meet John and gave him the map. But neither of them knew that Topper had found them. What was worse was that he saw them kissing passionately. The two rivals immediately got into an argument until John was pushed and fell down. Hearing the cries for help, the Poe members, who were not far away, rushed to the scene. The next day, John was hospitalized, and luckily his life was not in danger. Sarah also told her father everything John had been doing recently. He was also very grateful that John had protected Sarah when they were on the tower. To repay this debt, Ward offered to become John's guardian, so he would not be sent to a foster home. From this moment on, John had a new home and a very spacious room. But living in the same house as Sarah made Kiera very uncomfortable. Surely, in the past, the two had had some conflict, which is why they disliked each other so much. Once they had the map of Tanny Hill, the group began to determine the location of the hidden gold. With his intelligence, Pope deduced that it was at Mrs. Crane's house. There was a legend that she had killed her husband with an axe, so they were all quite scared to enter the boundaries of Mrs. Crane's property. But since this was the only clue, the group was still determined to infiltrate the place. With caution, they broke into the basement of the house. One thing they had to face here was a lot of mosquitoes. At this point, Pope discovered an old well. They hadn't found any gold yet, but JJ assumed this was where Mrs. Crane hid her husband's body. To get down there, they needed a very strong rope, so they would temporarily go back to discuss a plan. But with Sarah's participation, Kiera was extremely annoyed. While she and Sarah were arguing, the two guys, JJ and Pope, were making bets on the side. So the initial plan went nowhere because of the two girls' argument. At the corner of the pier, Kiera told Pope about the conflict between her and Sarah. It turned out that they used to be friends, but Sarah had turned her back on her. Meanwhile, Peterkin and Shoop were investigating an island where Scooter was believed to have gone on the night he died. After a search, Peterkin found a campsite and a pair of glasses in the sand. The strange thing was that these glasses belonged to John's father. In the past year, 4 people had died in connection with the search for the gold from the shipwreck. Therefore, their deaths must be related. At Sarah's house, Rafe was being pestered by Barry for the money he owed for the drugs. Since he had no money, Rafe was warned by having his hand pressed against the exhaust pipe of a motorcycle. After that, the young man decided to steal his father's money to pay the debt. However, just as he opened the safe, he was discovered by Ward. That night, he decided to go to Barry's place to pay off his son's debt, and also to give Barry a beating for his rude attitude. This move made Rafe also afraid of his father's capabilities. At this point, Ward also officially kicked Rafe out of the family. The next day, the Poe group decided to let Kiera and Sarah have a private conversation by leaving the two girls stranded on a boat with a broken engine. Thanks to this, the two had a frank conversation until it got dark. The next day, when the boys returned, Sarah and Kiera had resolved their issues. Waiting until it got dark, the group went to Mrs. Crane's house again. But as soon as they entered the garden, the lights in the garden turned on because of a sensor. The plan was for Sarah and Kiera to disable the motion sensor of the lights, while the boys would break into the basement to search for gold. Very quickly, the two girls broke into the house. The eerie silence in there made them very scared. When they successfully turned off the sensor, it was time for the boys to act. John would be the one to go down the old well first, but a slip of JJ's hand made the young man scream in fear. As a result, the noise woke up the sleeping Mrs. Crane. She immediately went downstairs to check the situation. At this point, John had also safely reached the bottom of the well. But the first thing John found was the jawbone of Mrs. Crane's husband. The young man was terrified and asked Pope and JJ to pull him up. But during the ascent, John accidentally stumbled upon a hole. The group had to temporarily stop so he could crawl inside. In the tunnel was a spacious area, and there were indeed pieces of gold there. Upstairs, the two girls had been discovered by the old woman. Kiera was cornered by Mrs. Crane and attacked, but Sarah appeared in time to pull her away. Unexpectedly, the two ran straight down to the basement. So the group had to pull John out of there before Mrs. Crane came down. Suddenly, she appeared with a shotgun, but because she was blind, Mrs. Crane was pointing the gun randomly. By the time John climbed up, the whole group had fled in disarray. Luckily, everyone managed to escape successfully. However, looking at John's current state, the group was even more horrified. But anyway, they had to celebrate, because they had found the gold. Returning home, John couldn't stop describing the gold treasure to Sarah, but they had no idea that Ward had been eavesdropping on everything. So he came up with a plan to seize the gold by planning a fishing trip with John early the next morning. Back with the group, Kiera used some tricks to process the few gold bars John had obtained. Soon after, the group would take them to a pawn shop to exchange for cash. Unfortunately, this pawn shop belonged to Barry. Hearing about a large gold bar, he came up with a plan to seize it. Since there wasn't enough cash here, they needed to go to the shop's warehouse. But on the way, the group was ambushed by Barry, who had planned to block the road by pretending to be a police car. The whole group was immediately forced out and told to bow their heads on the side of the road. Unable to lose the gold bar, John decided to fight back. When he found the gold bar, he got into his car, took the key, When Barry just got into the car, he was attacked from behind by John, who took the gun. Everyone immediately acted in coordination, successfully taking him down. After giving him a beating, the group took back the gold bar and left. On the way back, JJ stopped by Barry's private home because he wanted to steal his money as revenge. Although everyone tried to stop this behavior, JJ was very stubborn. When he returned home, Luke didn't even bother with him. It was only when he saw the money he had just stolen that he paid attention to him. As soon as he saw the money, Luke's attitude immediately changed, but shortly after, he planned to use the money for gambling. This annoyed JJ because he originally wanted to use the money to compensate for Topper's boat. He decided to take the money back and was beaten by Luke. So JJ angrily beat his old man back. When Luke was subdued, he also declared that he was no longer afraid of him. That night, when Pope and Kiera returned to their base, they saw that JJ had bought a hot tub. It turned out that in his desperation, the young man had spent all the money. But looking at the wounds on his body, Kiera and Pope immediately understood the problem. JJ must have suffered a lot from his abusive father. Before the sky had even brightened, Ward took John on the planned fishing trip. During the trip, Ward also revealed his purpose. He knew that John had found the location of the gold. Ward warned that John was only 16 and couldn't own such a large amount of gold because it would definitely attract the attention of the police. In short, Ward wanted to hold the gold for him. However, after all, John still denied finding the gold. So Ward said he knew everything related, from the compass to the inscription Redfield on it. Hearing this, John immediately wondered how he could know this and that he must be involved in his father's disappearance. Therefore, John planned to report this to the police and turn the boat back. But at this point, Ward picked up a gaff hook as if to attack him. He demanded that John stay away from the helm and blamed everything on his father. Immediately, he also got into a fight with him. But shortly after, John was knocked down to the lower deck. While trying to call for help, Ward came to continue the attack. Luckily, John's bandaged arm accidentally saved his life. Thanks to that, he ran out the back door and climbed up to untie the jet ski. By the time Ward realized, it was too late. The young man sped off at full speed to get back to shore. Ward realized that it was too late and injured himself, so that he could turn the tables if John reported to the police. He didn't go straight home, but went to Mrs. Lana's house. She said that on the night his father disappeared, Scooter had talked to Ward. That day, John's father confirmed that he had found the location of the gold. So the two had an argument about the percentage split. As a result, John's father was pushed, hit his head on the boat's railing, and gradually passed out. To cover up his actions, Ward threw him into the sea. But he was still alive and managed to swim to an island. But his survival did not last long. The last thing he did was to carve the word Redfield on the compass. On the evening Ward returned, he went to find Scooter to continue searching for the gold based on the clues left by John's father. That day, Hurricane Agatha appeared, and they still hadn't found the location of the gold. When Scooter continued to search on the island, he found John's father's compass and his body. Because he knew the truth, he tried to return everything to John. At this point, Ward had returned to the island and went straight to the police station. He started to make up a story that John had attacked him. However, these accusations immediately made Peterkin feel that something was wrong. Meanwhile, John had returned home, taken a gun, and left, which scared his friends quite a bit. When it got dark, he went to Ward's house. First, he told Sarah everything that had happened. But in Sarah's eyes, Ward was a wonderful father, so she couldn't believe he was a murderer. Soon after, Sarah was completely manipulated by Ward into believing that he was the victim of the fight on the fishing trip. Ward even successfully persuaded her to reveal the location of the gold at Mrs. Crane's house. On the Pogue's side, Pope didn't want any trouble tonight, specifically not going to look for John with everyone because he had an interview for a college scholarship tomorrow. So Pope and Kiera had an argument. The next morning, when John went to Mrs. Crane's house to look for gold, it was all gone. Meanwhile, Pope was preparing for the biggest interview of his life. But during the interview, he was distracted by the fact that his father worked for Ward, and he was having to cut down a long row of palm trees for Ward's private plane. So Pope skipped the interview and ran back to the Pogue group. He began to explain about Ward's unusual flight. He wanted a long runway for takeoff, so he must be carrying something very heavy. After some thought, he guessed he was carrying their gold. Immediately, the Pogue group made a plan to rob the gold back. Sure enough, at that moment, Ward was taking Sarah to the airport to go to the Bahamas. It didn't take long for the Pogue group to also arrive at the airport. However, they had nothing to get through the fence. Seeing Ward starting the plane, John drove the car straight through and then sped up to block the runway. Unable to cause a murder, Ward had to stop the takeoff. At this point, Peterkin also drove up, announcing that Ward had been arrested for the murder of John's father. When Ward tried to resist, a gunshot rang out. It turned out that Rafe was the one who shot the sheriff. At this point, John had no choice but to run away under Sarah's protection. Soon after, she was also taken away by Rafe on Ward's orders. Meanwhile, he had sent the plane to the Bahamas with his people. At this point, the whole group also knew that all the gold was gone, so they were furious. At the airport, Ward was pretending to save Peterkin. When Deputy Shoop arrived, she was quickly taken to the hospital but could not survive. Through this, Ward blamed everything on John without anyone knowing, because at this point Sarah was locked in her room. The police held an emergency meeting. Their purpose was to carry out a large-scale manhunt for John. Soon, posters of him were plastered all over the island. Knowing the current situation, the Poe group needed to come up with a plan to rescue John. The goal was to steal JJ's father's formula boat so John could escape the island. While discussing the plan, his identity was suddenly discovered, so the group had to drive away madly. But with more and more police chasing, John had to leave the car and hide. Hiding somehow, he ended up right in Kelsey's house. So he immediately grabbed a kitchen knife and chased him out. Because John had locked himself in a room, Kelsey used a chair to block the door. Then he called Topper to come and see what was happening. On Sarah's side, she was rescued by her little sister Wheezy. Through this, the little girl would keep her escape from home a secret. However, at Kelsey's house, the police had been led by him to arrest John. But luckily, he had cleverly disappeared through a vent. When Sarah learned that John had not been caught, she immediately thought of their secret place. But just as the two arrived, Topper also showed up. At this point, he just wanted to talk to Sarah. After confirming that Rafe was the one who shot the sheriff, he was stunned. At this point, the police had arrived outside. Even Rafe and Kelsey showed up. He decided to burn the whole place down because his crime had been exposed. But then, Topper decided to distract the police so John and Sarah could leave safely. It seemed this was the last kind thing he wanted to do for the girl he loved. Until the next morning, the Poe group still didn't know where John was, and by now the police had even deployed an armed helicopter for the search. It seemed John's escape route was becoming more and more difficult. At the hideout, when he woke up, Sarah was gone. She had left a note asking John not to go anywhere until she returned. It turned out Sarah wanted to prove to the police that John was not the culprit. But before she could explain, Ward appeared to prevent everything from being revealed. Of course, her persistence caught the attention of a police officer. Feeling that she couldn't convince them, Sarah tried to run away. Meanwhile, Rafe had gone to Barry's place because of his craving for drugs. But before that, he had had all his money stolen by JJ, so he had no more goods. Currently, he was blaming the Poe group. Since they had a common goal of wanting to catch John, the two planned to attack them. On the Pogues' side, they were carrying out a plan to steal Luke's phantom boat. JJ started by drugging him. After Luke fell asleep, he successfully took the key to the boat. John had decided to go back home to get the last remaining gold bar. However, it had already been found by Deputy Shoop. While he was inside searching further, he took it back and stole the car and fled. Back with the Poe group, they had reached the phantom boat. However, Barry and Rafe had also arrived. Barry immediately attacked JJ to vent his anger. However, Rafe was only interested in where John was. Since Kiera also did not hesitate to tell the truth that he was the one who shot the sheriff, in a moment of carelessness, Pope took an iron rod and attacked him from behind. He was beaten to a pulp by him. On this side, JJ also successfully dealt with Barry. Taking that opportunity, the Poe group took the boat and left the warehouse. Just then, John drove up, startling them with the police car. What needed to be done now was to get out of there quickly. After a brief farewell, he left on a boat by himself. Soon after, the police arrived and arrested the remaining members. The boat hadn't even left the bay when luckily Sarah arrived in time, so the two of them would escape together. However, a tropical storm was about to hit the island and the police were everywhere, so John could only turn off the engine and let the tide carry the boat out. But unfortunately for them, the light from the lighthouse spotted them. Immediately, the police began a chase. The further they fled, the closer they got to the center of the storm. But for now, that was the only way for Sarah and John. Very quickly, rain and large waves came crashing down. Ward tried to contact them via the phantom boat's radio, asking them to bring Sarah back and surrender. But instead of following Ward's request, John told the police everything he had done, that he had killed his father, and now he was framing him for murder. At this point, John had nothing left to lose, so he certainly didn't need to hide these truths. Of course, this action was fully supported by Sarah. But soon after, due to the large waves, the Phantom completely capsized. And after John's words, the police requested a private conversation with Ward. At this point, the search team confirmed that John and Sarah's boat had capsized and they could not be found. Hearing this, Their friends were completely devastated. But by the time morning came, the two of them were actually still alive. Even better, they saw a cargo ship nearby. And so, the two were rescued and brought on board safely. The ship's owner was a really good person and helped them a lot. What was even more unexpected was that this ship was heading to Nassau, Bahamas. Through this, John and Sarah realized this would be their chance to get the gold back. Meanwhile, the Poe group were mourning John and Sarah, thinking they had died at sea. At the same time, the island community was grieving for the former Sheriff Peterkin. With his lawyer, Ward was successfully acquitted in the police investigation. Currently, a problem had arisen for John and Sarah. A crew member on Terrence's ship had found a wanted poster for John with a reward of up to $50,000. Terrence decided he would turn John in when they reached Nassau. The reason they didn't report the crime right away was because their ship was carrying 6 types of contraband. Soon after, he asked the two of them to go to the command cabin, but as soon as they were inside, he locked the door. Very quickly, Terrence's cargo ship arrived in Nassau. As soon as he met the customs police, he reported that he had caught John and Sarah. When they stormed the command cabin, the two had broken a window and fled. A chaotic chase ensued at the port. Thanks to Sarah's quick thinking, they escaped their pursuers. Afterwards, she led John to a luxury hotel. It turned out that Sarah had been here as a child. On the way, John had swiped the phone of a cleaning lady. Then, Sarah pointed out her family's house in the Bahamas. Immediately, John realized this must be where Ward's gold was hidden. But since John was a wanted man, Sarah didn't want him to act carelessly. Over in the Outer Banks, the Pogas were in class when they received a message from a stranger. It turned out that John had sent them a picture as proof that he and Sarah were still alive. Immediately, the whole group rushed out of the classroom. It turned out they still didn't believe it was real, so they had to ask John again if it was really him. When they confirmed that John was still there, the group shed tears of happiness. He also told the group that he was currently in Nassau. Meanwhile, Ward was constantly pressuring Shoop to target the Pogas because he was afraid that one day they would expose the whole truth. That night, while Sarah was sound asleep, John couldn't stop thinking about Ward's house. So he decided to go there by himself. But the gate of this mansion was always guarded, so John had to climb over the back fence, then successfully climb onto the roof and break into a room. Very quickly, John saw the heavy drag marks of a safe. The gold must be hidden here. At this point, Sarah woke up and saw that John was gone. She immediately realized where he was. But unfortunately, Terrence had arrived with his men and kidnapped her. Soon after, a girl named Cleo was sent to inform John of Sarah's situation. The condition for seeing her, of course, was that John had to turn himself in. And so, he had to get into Cleo's car to go to the meeting point. At Terrence's house, Sarah showed him the gold bar. She also said that besides this one, they had many more. So Terrence shifted his focus to the gold in Sarah's family mansion. On the Pogas side, they were planning to clear John's name. First, Pope suggested they should target Ward's pilot who flew the plane, as he was definitely at the scene and would be the clearest evidence. Very quickly, the group went to the pilot's house. Pope would be the one to sneak in and plant a listening device in his car. That evening, Kiera deliberately called the pilot, Gavin, saying she knew what happened on the runway that day. As Gavin was confused, Kiera hung up like a fisherman casting a line. Immediately, he drove away from his house, so the Pogas followed him. On the way, Gavin called Ward, but their conversation was overheard by Pope. Unexpectedly, Gavin wanted more money than previously agreed. It turned out he was holding the gun that Rafe had used to shoot the sheriff. Previously, Ward had asked Gavin to throw it away, but he hadn't. Realizing someone was targeting him, Gavin wanted to use it to blackmail Ward for a plane to leave the island. The two planned the exchange for that very night. At the same time, on this side, John's group was also in action. With Terrence's arrangement, they were driven into the mansion grounds. Sarah easily found the key hidden under a seashell. But when they entered the house, a notification was immediately sent to Ward's phone, making him feel that something was wrong. Sarah was trying every possible password to open the safe. When she used her own birthday, the door opened, revealing a pile of gold. But while they were collecting it, the police arrived on Ward's orders. So the group had to close the safe and flee first. But Terrence was extremely nasty, locking John and Sarah inside the house to serve as bait. John decided to create a distraction so Sarah could escape first, but he didn't get far before he was caught by the police. Soon after, they made a video call to Ward, seeing John's face, but Sarah wouldn't let that happen by activating the sprinklers, so Ward's phone couldn't see anything. Then, Sarah stepped out, pretending to be a resident, even saying John was just the neighbor's boat washer. As soon as they were distracted, she used a spray and so they could both run. They managed to get into the car and successfully escaped. At the meeting point of Ward and Gavin, the Pogas had arrived. When the two met, Pope recorded everything. Currently, Ward and Gavin were arguing because the agreed-upon amount was not enough. The two got into a struggle. But in terms of fighting, Ward had a clear advantage. He gave Gavin a beating and took back the gun. After that, he even shot and killed him, terrifying the Pogues. With his last bit of strength, Gavin continued to struggle, causing the gun to fall into his sewer. As Ward tried to find it, Kiera screamed to scare him away. But as he fled, Pope accidentally fell, breaking the camera. At this point, Sarah and John went to Terrence's place again. They wanted to make a deal with him to plan to get the gold back. Each person in Terrence's group would receive $10 million for this job. On the Pogues side, they were reporting everything to Shoop. But Pope's camera was broken, so they currently couldn't prove anything. Moreover, the scene here had been cleaned up by Ward beforehand, so no matter what they said, Shoop didn't believe what the group reported. At this point, Pope suddenly remembered the gun was still in the sewer. Ward had brought Gavin's body home to Rafe's astonishment. After explaining everything that had happened, the father and son decided to dispose of the body. When morning came, Sarah decided to call Wheezy to say she was still alive, of course, asking the little girl not to tell anyone about this. Sarah had learned from Wheezy the detailed information about Ward's gold transport. Immediately, her group drew up a plan to seize the gold when the safe was moved. After the discussion, Cleo apologized to Sarah and also warned her not to fully trust Terrence. On the Pogues side, they were searching every pipe to find the gun. But because JJ and Pope were afraid of worms getting on them in the sewer, Kiera had to be the one to carry out this plan. At the same time, Rafe was also asking Barry for help in finding the gun. Based on his experience, Barry suggested just flushing water into the sewer to wash the gun out. Soon, water came rushing in, making Kiera below very scared. Even the two guys outside were almost washed away. The two of them ran with all their might to the manhole where Kiera was trying to climb out. With the effort of all three, Kiera narrowly escaped death. What was even more unexpected was that she had found Rafe's gun. Because he couldn't get the gun, father and son Ward were planning to leave. At this point, the Pogues had brought the gun as evidence to Shoop. But even so, he still didn't listen to what the group said. Pope even wondered if Ward had bribed him. After they left, Shoop checked the information on the gun and it was indeed Ward's. However, he just kept it in a drawer instead of sending it for investigation. The next day, Ward and Rafe flew to Nassau. He showed Rafe the gold to convince him to follow all his arrangements. Seeing such a large amount of gold for the first time, Rafe couldn't believe his eyes. While the father and son were moving the gold, John's group also planned to block their way. However, Ward was extremely careful, bringing along an armed security team for the transport. Hearing the current situation, John's group seemed quite worried. However, all of Ward's movements were being watched by them. Then, a group of children suddenly appeared and surrounded the convoy. Taking advantage of the chaos, they laid spiked traps underneath, so that only Ward's gold-carrying vehicle could leave. When they reached a sugarcane field, Terrence and Cleo pretended to be doing construction work. While confused, Ward and Rafe were subdued. This was the moment for John and Sarah to act, hijacking the vehicle. But seeing a familiar figure, Ward immediately realized it was his daughter. In the chaos, Rafe pulled out a gun from behind and fired, but luckily Cleo and Terrence managed to stop him in time for John to drive away. At this point, Ward's security team's vehicle, after having its tire repaired, was approaching from behind. Because it was carrying gold, John's vehicle couldn't speed up. It even almost overturned on a curve. But thanks to that, John successfully shook off the security force's vehicle. Although they had escaped, there was another problem. Sarah had been shot by Rafe earlier. In an emergency situation, John had to call Terrence. It didn't take long for him and Cleo to arrive. On the way, Terrence had arranged for a doctor for them. While John took Sarah away, Terrence and Cleo would take the gold first. So the young man drove at full speed to the doctor's location. Luckily, he was very enthusiastic to help, but this enthusiasm came at a price of $4,000. With no money here, John could only give him the single gold bar. Not long after, the bullet was removed and Sarah's wound was being stitched up, although she was still in a coma. Meanwhile, Terrence had started loading the gold onto a boat. After that, he had someone destroy the vehicle to get rid of the evidence. But soon, the police arrived at the port. On this side, Pope was being visited by his scholarship sponsor to express regret for his missed opportunity. However, a philanthropist had sent a letter to Pope. He immediately recognized the wheat symbol on the envelope, which was very similar to the ones on the gold bars. The group immediately opened it to find out the contents. The person who wrote the letter to Pope was named Limray. She claimed that she could help clear John's name, but they needed to meet in person in Charleston. Immediately, Pope realized that Limray might be related to the captain of the Royal Merchant shipwreck. So Pope used his father's car and set off with his friends. Ward and Rafe were at the police station again. While Ward was happy to know that Sarah was still alive, Rafe was like a lost soul. At this point, he finally admitted to Ward that he had shot Sarah. He even seemed not to care because she had stolen the gold. When questioned by the police, Ward said that John had kidnapped his daughter and even injured Sarah. Once again, Ward blamed everything on John. Sarah finally woke up after many hours in a coma. Worried about the gold, she insisted that John take her out of there. But now there were many police on the road. Seeing this, the doctor decided to give them an old car. But when they reached the port, they saw a lot of police there. They hadn't recognized John and Sarah yet, but there was bad news. There had just been a shootout here. It seemed Terrence's group had fought against the police because they were seizing the gold right in front of them. As soon as they were recognized, John immediately drove away. The very persistent police chased right behind them. Luckily, John drove into an alley and lost them. Then, he accidentally hit someone on the road, and that person was none other than Cleo. So the three of them would continue their escape. On the way, Cleo revealed that the police had come from all directions, targeting them. So she had to jump into the sea to escape, while Terrence and his henchman Stubbs had a shootout with the police, but it seemed they couldn't escape. On this side, the Pogues were cruising along the road to their meeting with Lim Ray when their car suddenly broke down. It was certain that after this incident, they couldn't continue moving with it. So the group spent a lot of money and time fixing the car. That night, Cleo decided to stay behind to ensure John and Sarah could continue to escape. Before they could leave, they were spotted by a policeman. However, Cleo knocked him out from behind. After throwing the boat key to John, she also immediately jumped into the water. And so, the three of them were able to escape. By the time morning came, the two had seen a town on the mainland, and the place they were heading to was Charleston, which was also where the Pogue members were going. They had arrived at Limbree's mansion, but according to the agreement in the letter, only Pope was allowed to meet her. Thus, JJ and Kiera could only wait outside. As soon as she met Pope, she discussed the royal merchant ship that the Pogues had discovered. She even knew that the group had found the gold. Limray revealed that Ward was a former partner in the search for the royal merchant, so she was surely not the only one he had double-crossed. To prove that she could clear John's name at any time, Limray produced a recording of Gavin admitting that Rafe had killed Peterkin. But of course, there was a condition to help John, Denmark's key. But Pope had truly never heard of this key. Seeing this, Limray led Pope to the back garden. Her entire family had lived here for 280 years. In front of Pope now was Denmark's grave. He was said to be a famous former slave in this land. He had used gold to buy freedom for his 3 sons. But when he tried to buy freedom for his wife and daughter, Limbree's ancestors refused. When Denmark's wife tried to escape with her daughter, they released hounds to chase them. As a result, the wife died, but the daughter was lucky to survive, while Denmark was hanged after that event for inciting a slave revolt. But after hearing this story, Pope still didn't know which key Limray was after. Seeing Pope refused to reveal, she planned to take him hostage. He got into a struggle with Limbree's henchman. When he was about to use a taser, he attacked his weak spot. Just then, JJ and Kiera arrived to help him escape. However, the henchman was very persistent and followed them in his car. Unexpectedly, their chase crossed paths with John and Sarah on the road. At this point, the car broke down again, so the group could only leave it and run. Meanwhile, John and Sarah had stolen a car on the side of the road to follow and rescue the group. So the whole group ran for their lives. When they met, John used all his strength to kick the damn car to help the group escape successfully, then returned to the boat and left safely. On the way back to the Outer Banks, the group had a lot to talk about, and John also said he wouldn't run away anymore. This time, he would definitely find a way to get Ward arrested. He had also returned to the island. Here, Ward told his wife that Sarah and John were still alive. However, Rafe had shot her, so the situation was still unclear. But Rose was only Sarah's stepmother, so she didn't seem too bothered by it, even asking Ward to make a choice between Rafe and Sarah. On this side, the Pogues had returned to their nest. As soon as they got back, the group went to buy beer to celebrate. But this action was seen by Kelsey. Immediately, he told Rafe about it. So he went to Barry to borrow a gun. Hearing that John was still alive, Barry also decided to join the plan to take him out. Meanwhile, the Pogues were still enjoying life, unaware of anything. At this point, Pope and Kiera had decided to sneak away on a boat. Then, John heard the chickens in front making an unusual noise. It turned out that Barry and Rafe had come to this place. Luckily, thanks to the noise made by the chickens, the whole group escaped up a tree. As soon as morning came, everyone decided they had to leave. Under the current circumstances, Sarah decided to return to her home, so Ward would have to make a choice between her and Rafe. Although John was very worried, this was the best choice at the moment. And so, Sarah returned to her familiar home on her own. As soon as he saw his daughter, Ward couldn't believe his eyes. But she was determined not to let him get close, and Sarah even declared that she would testify against Ward. All that was needed was to convince Rafe to turn himself in, and everything would be resolved. But even so, Ward still blamed everything on John, saying he was the main reason for the sheriff's death. With all her disappointment, Sarah immediately turned and left. When she left, Shoop received an order to carry out a manhunt for John. Immediately, a team of police went to the Pogas hideout. At this point, the group had no choice but to flee quickly. But by now, the police were everywhere, and with Sarah's injury, John decided to turn himself in. Immediately, the policeman Thomas rushed in and beat him up. Not long after, John had to stand before his first hearing for first-degree murder, facing a maximum sentence of death. Obviously, this decision infuriated the Pogas. In the pouring rain, the Pogas were extremely confused because they now didn't know how to rescue John. Meanwhile, Ward was using money to bribe a female officer, Terry, with the purpose of arranging for another prisoner to kill John in prison. Pope was talking to his father about Mrs. Limray. Looking at the drawing he brought, he immediately recognized something. He also confirmed it was something his great-grandmother used to wear around her neck. On Kiera's side, she also went home to seek help. She hoped her mother would give her some money so John could hire a private lawyer. However, being a kook who was always involved with the Pogas was something Kiera's mother could not accept. After this, she was even kicked out of the house by her mother. As for JJ, he went straight to the prison to see John. As soon as they met, the two of them had a good laugh. Then, JJ got to the main point. He and everyone else were carrying out a rescue operation. It involved faking an illness or injury to be taken to the infirmary, where JJ would ask for help from his cousin Ricky, who worked there. Sarah had sent a message to her little sister Wheezy and arranged to meet her. But because he had forgotten his phone, Rafe read the message. That night, Pope went to an old apartment of his great-grandmother's, but despite rummaging through everything, he couldn't find any key. At this point, Pope noticed that the ceiling of the room was very similar to the drawing. After falling from the stairs, he accidentally saw a hole above. Sure enough, when he searched up there, Pope found a key, and this was the best get-out-of-jail-free card for John. Immediately, he went back to tell Kiera everything. When they shone a light through it, a text appeared quite clearly. It said, "The path to the crypt begins in the room on the island." However, they still didn't know where the crypt on the island was specifically located. Meanwhile, JJ had stolen his cousin's ambulance and was waiting outside the prison. As soon as a police officer arrived, he received an emergency case. At this point, Officer Terry had given the door key to the prisoner who was about to kill John. Meanwhile, JJ was forced to pick up a prisoner who was not his friend. As soon as he left, John was attacked from behind in prison. The guy was quite tall, so he couldn't fight back. With his will to survive, John landed a blow on the guy, then shouted for the guards. At this point, the prisoner could only stop the attack and return to his cell. Soon after, Shoop came to the cell and was told by John about the recent attack. At the pier, the person who came to meet Sarah was not Wheezy, but Rafe. So she immediately ran away, but not far before he caught her and dunked her in a nearby basin of water. Luckily, at the crucial moment, Topper appeared in time and took down Rafe. Not stopping there, he gave him a beating and warned that if Rafe attacked Sarah again, he would kill him. When morning came, Shoop met with his FBI colleague. He revealed that he had found fingerprints on the gun that matched Rafe's. This was enough to prove that the former sheriff's death was related to him. At this point, Shoop realized that the Pogas had been right all along. Immediately, a large number of police were dispatched to surround the Tanny Hill plantation. After that, John was also acquitted and released from prison. His job was to prepare his testimony if the next trial took place. Many friends in the cut were happy that John had been released, and the happiest of all were his Pogue friends. However, at this time, Sarah had disappeared without anyone knowing. It turned out she was at Topper's place. Although he was a jerk, he was very kind to the person he loved. At Tanny Hill, the police were searching everything in Ward's house. However, they still couldn't find where Rafe was. At this point, Sarah had been brought back by Topper. But seeing the two of them together, John was very disappointed. Hearing that Topper had rescued Sarah last night made him even more jealous. So after that, the two had an argument. On Pope's side, Limbrey's henchman, Renfield, had attacked his father. Immediately, the group received a warning. Luckily, Pope's father was only slightly injured after being attacked by Renfield. At Limbrey's apartment, during a conversation between her and Renfield, a truth was revealed. Renfield was Limbrey's half-brother. At this point, Rose had helped Ward escape the police's sight by hiding in the trunk of a car. The Pogas went to a nursing home. Here, Pope met his great-grandmother again. He gave her the key to see if she remembered anything. After thinking for a moment, she remembered something and asked Pope to take it away. After Pope begged her, she also revealed the truth. It turned out that Denmark was Pope's ancestor from many generations ago. On Ward's side, he had secretly gone to Barry's house. It was not too surprising that Rafe was hiding there. He gave Rafe some money and forced him to flee the island. Soon after, Rafe asked Barry to go with him for some money. While the Pogues were discussing Pope's ancestry, Limray arrived. But because she had had his father assaulted, Pope was very angry. John produced an old key of his father's to distract her. So they would start a negotiation, the key in exchange for Gavin's confession tape. At this point, Barry and Rafe were on their way, but when they reached a swamp, Barry ran away. It turned out he had called the police to come and catch Rafe. Because Rafe intended to resist, the police were forced to shoot first, causing him to jump into a boat. He couldn't get far as the police on the shore also came and caught him. After that, John gave the tape to the police. Finally, the police knew all the bad things Ward had done. Immediately, Judge Holden signed an arrest warrant for Ward. The warrant taking effect made Sarah a little confused, because after all, Ward was her father. When the police started to act, the group also went to watch. At this time, Ward was on his boat. When he saw the police surrounding the entire river, he started to press the boat's ignition button. Then, a huge explosion occurred, causing the entire boat to blow up. Witnessing this scene, Sarah could only burst into tears and collapse. Topper ran to hug her for comfort. Meanwhile, John was completely frozen on the side. In a video he recorded himself, he admitted to being the murderer who killed John's father and the pilot Gavin. Not only that, he also claimed to be the culprit who killed the former sheriff, thereby getting Rafe released. After this confession, the Pogues were not happy either because one of their members, Sarah, was probably the saddest. And after this, she ended her relationship with John. That very night, she ran to Topper's house. When Sarah arrived, he was so happy he was speechless. Here, Topper invited her to the annual bonfire tomorrow to forget her sadness. On Limbrey's side, she realized the key she got was a fake. Meanwhile, the Pogues were introduced to something by their history teacher, a diary of Denmark's. It revealed that the cross of Santo Domingo was on the Royal Merchant. This was the artifact that the key led to. The diary also revealed that Captain Limray of the Royal Merchant had stolen gold and the cross from a burning Spanish ship. He had left the Spanish to die there, despite their desperate screams. From this, they learned that the Limray family was rich because they had stolen the gold, and they still couldn't find where the cross was now. To relax their minds, the group decided to join the bonfire party at night. This was a traditional annual festival on the Outer Banks Island. As soon as they arrived, a girl caught John's attention. Meanwhile, Sarah was also there with Topper. But when she saw John with another girl, Sarah became very annoyed. As a result, she went to cause trouble. With the addition of Topper's appearance, John was not happy either. At this point, Kelsey stepped in and was punched by John. When Topper turned to attack him, Pope and JJ also arrived to join in. The bonfire party immediately turned into a brawl. After getting revenge with a few punches, the Pogues left. Back at the base, John immediately noticed something unusual at the chicken coop. It turned out that Renfield had come here with a few archers. In this case, Pope could only hand over his key. Soon after, Limray came to Tanny Hill, wanting to see the room on the island. The next day, when Sarah returned home, she found the door strangely open. After rummaging through the house, there was no one there. Soon after, she went to the Pogues. Although she was still arguing with John, what she was concerned about now was that the room on the island had been found. Immediately, the group returned to Sarah's house. In the main room was the trace of a map. The drawings completely matched Denmark's diary. Wheezy suddenly appeared. The little girl talked about Limbrey's appearance when she tore down the entire wall of the room, and also mentioned the cross and the treasure buried at the foot of the angel. Soon after, the group found the oak tree named Angel near a church. Immediately, they set off for the location. On the way, they saw tire tracks and realized Limray might have been there first. As expected, she was having people dig at the base of the tree. Therefore, the group could only watch from a distance. But what they found was a coffin, not a cross. When she opened it, Limray was completely disappointed because what was inside was just a nearly completely decomposed corpse. Believing this was just a mistake, Limray withdrew to continue investigating. As soon as they left, the group immediately approached the scene. There was a name written on the coffin, Cecilia, and this person was Denmark's wife. It turned out his real treasure was his wife. Pope decided that he could not let his ancestors suffer such desecration, so he and everyone else reburied Cecilia. After the burial, JJ accidentally discovered a hole in the tree trunk that looked like the one in the drawing. So he stuck his hand in to see if there was anything there. Sure enough, There was a spyglass hidden inside. Also, on it was an inscription. The cross is on the altar of freedmen. That was the name of the church on the island. But because the tide was rising, the group's car would have a hard time getting back. However, John was still stubborn and tried to drive the car through the area. As a result, the car lost control and stalled on the side of the road. So Kiera took the group to the church. The group quickly found the old freedman church. While Pope happened to look through the spyglass, he discovered a sign. A giant cross was right above their heads. Without hesitation, he immediately climbed up. But unfortunately for Pope, there was a beehive right at the cross. At this point, he accidentally discovered it was hollow inside. Pope immediately broke it to see what was inside, and what was revealed was a solid gold cross. But while they were happy, the bees went crazy and attacked. It made Pope almost slip, so they quickly spread a mattress underneath. When Pope fell, he was fine. But just as he was okay, the whole gold cross fell down. Luckily, he managed to turn away from where it fell. At this point, the whole group also got to touch the huge block of gold with their own hands. Dealing with the cross would be a problem for later. The group's current mission was to get it out of there safely. But unexpectedly, it was much heavier than they had imagined. On top of that, at this moment, Pope was also feeling very uncomfortable from being stung by bees. So everyone had to take him to the emergency room first, and the cross would be temporarily hidden here. But as soon as they left, Rafe and Renfield arrived. It turned out they had been watching the Poga's actions all along. At this point, Pope was taken to JJ's cousin for help. Knowing Pope's condition, Ricky used the best thing here, a dose of epinephrine. Although quite dangerous, this was the best way for now. After waking up, Pope felt his body was as hot as fire. According to Ricky, he would be hyperactive for half an hour until he returned to normal. That night, the group decided to go back to the church to get the cross. However, Pope was still quite hyperactive and accidentally caused an accident. As a result, Kiera's father's car was severely damaged. While the group was struggling with the trouble, Rafe and Renfield passed by. Sure enough, when they returned to the church, the cross was gone. Pope was furious because the Limray family had taken everything from his ancestors. Therefore, he swore that he would get the cross back at all costs. Of course, Pope's fight would not be without the participation of his friends. At this time, Renfield had arrived at an airport. As soon as he saw the solid gold cross, Limray couldn't believe her eyes. It was unclear how these two easily transported it while the Poe group was completely helpless. Limray believed that inside the cross was a shroud, something that could heal anything it touched. After that, she began to use the key to open a small square. However, there was nothing inside but a tangle of cobwebs. Seeing Renfield's mocking smile, she slapped him. He immediately retaliated, pushing Limray down. Then he left her there to continue with Rafe to move the cross. Seeing this attitude, Limray did not hesitate to shoot her half-brother. This move scared Rafe to death. He had to turn back to help Limray up. But he was very cunning, took the gun and left her there, then drove the car carrying the cross away. As soon as he returned home, the Pogues discovered him. Sarah volunteered to approach the car to check. But since she didn't have the car key, she had to go inside the house. When she met her little sister Wheezy, the girl said that her stepmother Rose wanted them to leave. Taking advantage of her sister's trust, Sarah asked her to distract Rafe. But he was very careful, locking the door as soon as he left the room. As a result, when he returned and found the door open, he knew someone had broken in. Before Sarah could leave, she was caught by him. Immediately, Rafe locked her in a room. After Rose realized, she decided to set her free, but then drugged Sarah with tea. When Rafe started the car to go to the port, Pope was determined to follow. Rose and Wheezy took Sarah away. John and JJ chased after them, trying to stop them, but were completely powerless. In the morning, Rafe had stopped the car in a forest to dispose of Renfield's body in the car. Soon after, a crocodile came and solved the problem for him. This scene made Pope, who was watching from a distance, extremely horrified. But just after that, he rushed to attack Rafe. He was not to be outdone, throwing punches in return. The two of them went back and forth, neither willing to give in. When Rafe pulled out a gun, Pope had to hide. After he left, he remembered the place where John had thrown JJ's gun when he was caught, then called Kiera to pick him up and take him to the pier. John and JJ had arrived at the pier. They saw a container truck also moving to this location. At this point, Rafe had transported the cross onto a ship called the Coastal Venture. Soon after, Sarah, who was being held hostage, was also brought onto the ship. At this time, Pope and Kiera had also arrived. Pope came up with an idea to cause a disturbance. He used a gun to shoot and blow up the gas tanks near the pier. This immediately distracted the crew. Taking this opportunity, the group climbed into a container to get on the ship. Luckily, the crew did not detect their intrusion. It didn't take long for the container to be lifted onto the ship. When the ship was out at sea, Sarah woke up. What was even more unexpected was that Ward was still alive and appeared before her. Immediately, he was slapped by Sarah. It turned out that the boat explosion was just a camouflage to help Ward escape. It must be said, he was extremely cunning to have escaped safely with his diving suit. Sarah didn't know whether to be happy or sad. Ward's entire family was safe, which he considered a truly complete thing. Taking advantage of only Rose being in the room, Sarah escaped. Coincidentally, she saw the place where Rafe had hidden the cross, then snuck into the command room to get a satellite phone. But while she was reporting to the police, she was caught by the captain, Ibrahimi. At the same time, the Pogues had removed the ventilation door for John and Pope to get out of the container. Soon, the two teens snuck into the ship's compartments to find the cross. The two decided to split up. Pope met his friend Cleo here. When she realized he was not a crew member, she did not hesitate to get into a confrontation with him. Although he had the advantage, due to a moment of distraction, Pope was attacked by her in a sensitive spot. It was only when he mentioned his plan and heard the names of John and Sarah that she stopped. Meanwhile, John had discovered that Ward was still alive and was arguing with Sarah. Just then, Pope brought Cleo over, which surprised him even more. The three of them returned to the container. Here, John also told everyone that Ward was still alive. The group immediately realized that he now had everything, all the gold and the cross. Everyone would plan to defeat the crew and the Ward family. Being on the ship, Cleo would be the key element in this counterattack. Of course, she had to be paid a share of the treasure. First, Pope would pretend to be caught as a stowaway and be taken to the command room. As soon as Ibrahimi approached, he attacked and knocked him out unexpectedly. Another crew member who came running was also taken down by Cleo. At the same time, Sarah and her father were arguing. As a result, she ran away, locking Ward in a room. On Pope's side, he forced the captain to announce for everyone to gather on the main deck. Hearing this announcement, the remaining members realized the initial plan had succeeded. Very quickly, everyone gathered together. But Rafe, worried about the cross, was lucky not to go there. Because at this time, Kiera and JJ had closed the only door to the main deck, locking everyone in. When the two of them found the cross, Pope also opened the door above. Meanwhile, John was still looking for Sarah. But unexpectedly, Rafe chased after him and attacked him. Having no weapon to fight back, he could only run away. Sarah had found a way out, a lifeboat. The tied-up captain had also freed himself with a knife. Then he found Ward trapped in a room, followed by his crew. At this point, Pope had started to lift the cross. On Sarah's side, when she had almost successfully escaped, Ward found her. In his anger, he did not hesitate to strangle his daughter. Luckily, John arrived just in time, throwing a punch that stunned Ward. But he was very tough, determined to stand up and fight back. While the two were struggling, JJ and Kiera were also facing the captain. Although it was 2 against 1, they couldn't deal with him. In a moment of carelessness, JJ fell into the sea. Immediately, Kiera dived into the sea to save him. On Pope's side, things were no less complicated as the crew had come with guns aimed at him, trying to get the cross back. Back on John's side, he had punched Ward, causing him to fall over the side of the ship, just as he had killed his father. But seeing Sarah next to him, John would not throw him into the sea. The two just jumped down to the lifeboat next to them. On Pope's side, he was also completely helpless. Therefore, he asked Cleo to release the rope. Simply put, if he couldn't have the cross, then no one could. But out of regret, Rafe rushed out to hold on to the rope. Meanwhile, Pope and Cleo had jumped down to join their friends. But they didn't expect the crew to rush to help Rafe. At this point, they could only run away first. Unfortunately, the cross was successfully held by Rafe, but the group certainly wouldn't give up so easily. Ward, after being beaten up by John, was lucky to be alive. As for the Pogues, after drifting at sea, they landed on a deserted island. Meanwhile, in the Outer Banks, a search was being conducted for the missing group. Somewhere in Barbados, Limray went to a house and showed a sign on a letter to a man. After that, he led her to meet a mysterious person, and that person's name was Big John, John's supposedly dead father, who was actually still alive. Today's story ends here. Thank you for watching. What do you think of this movie? Please comment down below.